Welcome to Fontribute, where we talk about fonts and their attributes. Fontribute. I'm Thomas Jockin, and I'm here with Erin McLaughlin again. Blech. Tongue. It's a long week. But Erin, thank you for being here with us again.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. Cool.
So,
So
what do we got today? What typeface are we talking about today, Erin?
I thought let's take a look at some script typefaces. Well, actually, I guess you might consider this local script 22 bold by Storm Type Foundry. That might be, would you call that maybe an upright italic? I don't even know.
A
It's
cursive?
cursive,
Upright
it's
cursive?
upright cursive. That's what it's called. Yeah, it's got that kind of vibe. And then Pique is was produced by Process Type Foundry, and that's a little bit more kind of scripty in its function and how it looks. But it's interesting to see these two typefaces. They're very dark. They're trying to go for kind of the hand influenced by kind of hand done sign writing, those sorts of influences, and something that's a little informal but a little edgy. So I thought maybe it'd be cool to kind of see these two different approaches and compare them.
Awesome. So let's just jump right in. So I think the N is a great point to compare and contrast. Erin, do you want to take the floor first and share what you see?
Well, something interesting to notice right away with these typefaces is that Pique is definitely has more of a diagonal stress to it all throughout all of the letters. You'll see that there's kind of a very consistent diagonal stress. And as we said earlier, local script is more of an upright. So just going from there, you can still kind of see here, like we have motion happening in local script here. There's a lot of a kind of a pen motion coming off of the terminal on this N right here on this leg of it. But Pique, I mean, we've got like very strong stress and like a very sharp ending point. And it's also cool in that, take a look at those side bearings. Pique kind of, it kind of like eats its way into the next character's space. So it kind of, it helps to create a more connected script look, whereas local script is a little more, within its bounding box and kind of each letter is a little more separated. What are some things you've noticed?
Well, that's first of all some great points you're making, Aaron. So definitely one thing is the contrast of the italic, like kind of the old, whoa, hi there, want to draw. There you go. The italicizing, right, a Pique versus the uprightness. But I find it interesting both how if we use a north side concept or kind of returning strokes, right? Basically in the sense of local kind of goes down straight, comes up and around, flicks out. Pique is doing effectively the same thing, right? I can say that because if I look at where the joints connect, the stem, they're both very low arched, right? Basically, the positioning of the arch is relatively low between the two. Also, there's a fun phenomenon as a strategy to deal with adding weights. When you get really bold like this, you end up start doing is emphasizing your primary stroke to the point where you're almost like abstracting out secondary strokes. Like again, notice the joints in Pique. See how thin out this area is? It's almost fading out to nothing. It's almost actually more like two strokes going like this, right? With like a slight indication connecting the two parts together. Local script is doing a similar phenomenon. Notice the thickness of the main stems versus how thin this joint is between the two. I think that's also, again, it's a general strategy when you're adding weight to this level. Something has to give. So what made sense is a kind of hairline letter, like say you have an E that's like this, or an N, say we do an N, right? Everything can be defined relatively equally. But when we get to a really bold weight, what's going to end up happening is you're going to have to prioritize some strokes over others to compensate for all the heavy added weight you just added in to the main stem. So I see that's a similar strategy both designs are doing.
This is interesting though. Look at this. Like I like how like it gets thinner, the stroke is thinner at the bottom, it tapers downward. And that kind of contributes to the more informal kind of gestural quality of the letter. And look how fat the stroke gets here. So it's kind of interesting. Local script is a lot more uneven in the weight distribution. I mean, uneven in a very, I'm not trying to say that's a bad thing. I'm saying it's like kind of really cool how the weight kind of change, it really changes. It looks like there's pressure being applied when you're writing it, which is kind of neat, like a slow pressure. Whereas Pique, it's like, feels like very, very fast movement. I also like, this is kind of interesting to me. They both have these curves, this is kind of a curved stroke here, this is curved here, but they have much different feeling. Like this feels so much more sharp. Also, when you were making this example here, like showing the gesture, to me it's interesting where it feels like Pique is like, there's a downward motion here, maybe up a little, but then it feels like it's curving inward slightly, like this. It feels like it's going back in toward the middle of the character, which I think is cool. Whereas here, it feels a little bit more like a outward slope. Oh, I just love the gesture of Pique. Can you tell by my enthusiasm? I love
Raw enthusiasm.
Okay.
Yeah, there's definitely overall, looking at how these strokes are handled, the terminals are handled, and even the shoulder. Kind of notice this shoulder versus this shoulder. Pique is much more like angular, rapid, quick paced, while local script is much more smoothie and kind of slower in tempo. If I had to compare the two, I felt Pique was written much faster than a local script was. Right, there's a certain sense of like if this was being written by hand, local script's much slower than Pique in this case.
Definitely, it's meandering. It's a ramble. Should we check out the next letter? See how that was? Yeah.
All right. So, Erin, what do you see?
Wow, it's so fun. This is so fun to see. Two very unusual O's. You don't see this very often, where there's a big cut or notch inside of an O here, and then a little, what would you call that? A
hair flip?
Eyelash? Yeah, I don't know, hair flip. Yeah, you're right. It's like a cowlick or something.
Donald Trump's hair.
A little, yeah, it's very cute. I mean, this would be the perfect O to make some cool like emoji type, or not emoji, but ASCII art faces or something like that. But anyway, this is very interesting to me that a very eye-catching element was added to this O, and this is the standard O in local script. Now, this typeface actually has a lot of different kind of alternate characters and ligatures, which are very commonly used when people design script typefaces. And in some cases, I believe the O like kind of changes and connects to the next letter. And I think that they probably added this element here so that you would maybe expect that to happen in certain cases, but I find that very unusual. Pique, however, I should note while we're here that if I'm not mistaken, I don't think it actually has alternate characters. I actually think this was a typeface designed very methodically so that each letter works with every other letter, and I don't think she made alternate characters or ligatures, which is also cool to notice. We'll look at that later. Anyway, I digress. So this is kind of cool, actually, now that I'm looking at this up close. Something you'll see in Pique, other than we're talking about this stress, is that sometimes we see like see this little like corner here? I don't want to cover it up, but there's like a little corner right there, just kind of almost an echo of this, where she's really, Nicole, she was actually my teacher. I have to mention that. I love Nicole. She was my typography teacher. She drew this typeface and like really left remnants of, whoa, my pen just went nuts. Okay, that wasn't supposed to happen. Sorry.
It's all good.
Left remnants of like, of where the brush stroke would be. So do you see that where it like looks like it's overlapping? Like I find that really kind of a cool element. It could be very distracting in a typeface, but she put really subtle little like hints of that. Oh, sorry, I went really into the micro. Talk about the macro maybe for a moment.
Well, I was going to follow up maybe a little more micro. Yeah. Like kind of notice the whole skeleton form of Pique is very different, right? There's like a stroke that's like going like this, right? It's almost like two strokes, right? Basically like this, that would explain that gap zone right here, in the sense that this is one move up here, right? And then the next one comes up and around this way, right? So I find that's very interesting. Just again, the skeleton form is so radically different than we normally expect, but it reads as an O, so very successful in that sense. Other things too is just noticing kind of how wider the top part of that primary stroke you just listed, like kind of this part right here versus the terminal. That's another thing I noticed. Local, moving over here, got more traditional, like kind of looks like an O, right? A big thing to note is a kind of weird, some interesting play on weights. Notice this is thinner than this, right? And there's and more emphasis of weight on this quadrant over here versus this quadrant. You know, kind of mimicking, if you did a connected script, you would want the weight to be over here so that you can have the next letter next to it, stack up next to it and not be too blobbed up. So yeah, it's a tension of like being cursive versus upright. Like there's that kind of tension, right? Because the Roman, the N is like this, so the idea is this O is like really an upright with this flick over to try to carry over the idea.
But it's unusual that it's like, to me, when I look at it, to me the axis looks like it's almost, you know, it's like happening this direction. So it's like kind of tilted and kind of not. I feel like the interior counter and the X and the outside of the O are kind of going in different directions or something. Like it's a very strange kind of balance. And to me, it looks kind of like it can't quite decide whether it wants to be straight up or sideways. It's got a lot of inner tension or something. It's, you know, this is something that you're going to notice, I think, in some of the other letters. I think in local script, there wasn't one particular direction all the letters are leaning. They're all kind of like going slightly different axes, which is kind of an unusual approach. But Pique, again, like we said, this letter is definitely following that same diagonal thrust. And it'll be cool once we look at the examples in context to see, like, you know, you wouldn't normally think that a giant gap like that would work in a typeface, but you know, it'll be interesting to see what that looks like, the texture later on.
Nice.
So should we, I don't know, should we hop to the next guy?
Hopping over. Okay.
So so this is gosh, oh, okay, I have to stop and just say how much I love this Pique D. Gosh, I love these letters. Again, we have, like we just saw, this is really kind of looks like a tapered brush stroke here. You know, it gets a little bit thinner down here. We really feel like someone has painted this really quickly with a brush with, you know, a soft edge up here, heading down, sharp, very thin little connector like you were describing with the N. I love this counter form shape. That's fantastic. And then we feel like the person had lifted the paintbrush, started another stroke up here, went down and flicked up. I love it. And again, like, check out these side bearings. We have these overlapping pieces here in the D so that it can kind of fit really tightly with the next letter. Now, this is the interesting thing. I was describing that O kind of felt like it didn't know which direction it was going. That N we saw previously, it kind of like felt kind of upright and had a little bit of, you know, a little bit of weight down here, but it felt kind of upright to begin with. This D is taking this kind of cursive form that you know, sometimes people write very quickly like that in old Spencerian script. I don't know where this form comes from, but it's like, feels like it's pushing backward. It has a very different kind of stress to me. It feels almost like, you know, like it's going to be a reverse italic or something like that. Like, what's your thought when you saw this?
Actually, what's funny, whenever I see D's like this, I always think of an F.
Yeah,
that's always my first reaction.
The Icelandic character, totally.
Yes, but kind of circling back, I think a big note. You commented before about the N back and the Pique N, where it kind of curves out and back in on itself, right on the end. I see that very clearly in this ascender for Pique. Notice kind of the straightness of this side of the stem, and then the curve edge on the other side. So that gives us momentum of movement, right? Moving towards, back towards the letter, and then the basically terminal brings it back the other way. So I see your point about the N being emphasized in the D. Also, just one other note about Pique, just noticing, you know, a relatively very short ascender, relatively, you know. I just want to take note of that. I think especially compared to
sure.
Yeah, local has a larger ascender space. I think that probably, as you were hinting at with application, I have a feeling that's going to affect application. It's going to affect the texture of the color of the type on multiple lines down the road. So I just want to point that out. It's something I observed. This D helps me identify that point. Yeah, the main problem is like problem or issue or thing I'm seeing with local script is this energy right here, right? So yeah, like notice that, see, I had this momentum, so it feels like the stress is going this way, yet the tail or terminal really kind of wants to be like vertical, you know. So there's like this yeah, this negative space down here creates this very strong tension that I'm not sure is really resolved 100% yet either. I see your point about that. Also, yeah, as you pointed out, I love the counter of Pique. I mean, it's like this like diamond shape. It's super. It speaks to the same vocabulary we see in the whole project. You know, kind of versus this. It feels a little lost, this counter inside local script.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting because remember how the O had that little like point that was kind of inferring, oh, it's probably going to visually connect to the letters next to it. This D was I really wanted to emphasize or talk about this and look at it up close because it's if you had an upright letter next to it, I mean, like you showed down here, there's a lot of empty space, and this kind of form doesn't really connect well with the next letter, the letter that'll come after it. So it does have like a very different texture. It feels a lot more like disconnected handwriting rather than something that's smoothly moving. So I don't know. I thought it was an odd choice, but very strange.
Next one.
Anything else we should talk about? Yeah, next one.
Yeah,
cool.
next one.
Okay. Yay.
Okay. So fun. So one thing I'll jump in this time because the K I found really fun. It's a fun application of the K, mainly because you got your main stem, right? So this K has this kind of arc on the top. This very sign painty feeling right up here. And then there's this really interesting abstraction going on right here, right? So it has the terminal, which is what we've seen in the other letters. And then there's this like triangulation, right? This like kind of the curve moves, stops, increases counter space right here. It's very cool. I think it's like again this idea of joining the two primary strokes together with an abstraction, so that your eye kind of groups them together into one form. I thought that was a really nice approach. I thought it was really cool. I'm gonna clear my sketches so that you can walk away.
Nice. Yeah, that's a very cool like kicking type gesture that comes up. And it's neat. This is another example where we can see, again, I have to just reiterate, we've got the same diagonal going with Pique, but here's another instance where local script, it's more upright, it's kind of a curved stem here. And it's neat because in some way these Ks both feel kind of like related to me. They kind of have a similar, I don't know, they feel very similar, even though you'll notice, obviously this K uses that kind of bubble formation or whatever looped formation, which is unusual to see in typefaces, but always fun when you find one like that. I really like this K on local script. I think this was done really well with the curves. I think they look really good, like the way this was handled and the weight distribution and stuff. This is one of my favorite characters of this typeface. Though again, to see like, well, actually, in both of them, they have the areas are a little bit thicker, like these kind of connecting areas. This one didn't have to have quite as much crazy contrast as the N and D examples we saw earlier. But gosh, I don't really know what else to say about it. It's cool to see when someone attempts this loop. Like, look at the points here. Like, I think that's kind of cool to see how they had to manage the space. It was a really kind of tricky way to make this feel like it's not top heavy. There's not too much weight up the bubble at the top, but it still feels strong. I don't know. I think it was drawn really well. I don't know what else to say about it. Do you have other thoughts?
Well, yes, I would agree with you. Like this is basically calling from a cursive form of the K, right? Done as an upright, right? So that's what makes this interesting. This arc over here comes up and around, and then it has to very rapidly turn back the tail of the K. So yeah, basically there's more room. Again, notice the same strategy, right? This is much thinner radically than this part, and this part. So the same strategy we saw in other letters are being applied here too. And Pique, same thing, basically. The primary strokes, there had to be the solution of basic compression of weight, thinning out to compensate for it. Also, a thing interesting to notice, like that's completely removed those strategy for connecting that to the main stem in Pique. Like there's basically two thick strokes. Like it's like primary stroke, and then it's kind of this implying of connection between the two, so that your eye associates it all together into, oh, that's a K.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a real extreme abstraction going on in Pique because of the weight constraints played into it. But it works. It reads and it speaks in the vocabulary of the project. But I would also agree that Local Scripts K is also pretty successful in its approach as well.
Nice stuff. Cool.
Cool. All right,
Ah.
Jay. So why did you pick this? Why are we reviewing these two letters?
I just wanted to point this one out. Like Pique follows a very, we've seen a lot of repetition and kind of like the logic of the typeface is we've seen is very kind of consistent from how the strokes are used and stuff. But there are a few cases in which she couldn't quite figure out like what's the best way to keep this system going and stick to the rules. And I think the J is a really difficult letter because, if in the Pique system, if you've got the strokes going this way, you probably, I don't know, how would you make a tail that felt kind of connected to the same system? She decided like, let's go backward and have a big cut going through it. And I thought that was kind of an interesting approach to imply like a very sharp, quick turn of the pen, but like so sharp you don't even see it. I thought that was kind of an interesting gesture. And these cuts they appear a couple of other times in the typeface, and also as well like to keep in mind like she had those kind of connecting strokes going over the side bearing and all those other letters, and here she kind of kept the same thing going where it peeks out just a little bit past the side bearing, but like, it might touch the character next to it, but not in a super obtrusive way. It was just kind of a delicate use of space. I thought that was interesting. And to note, this feels in local script, this does feel kind of fitting with the curve approach on the K and the other letters that we were seeing. But I also thought it would be neat to take a look at these. Is it still called a tittle when it's
Tittle.
over? Yeah,
Yes.
Tittle.
Yeah.
This is kind of cool also to see the different approaches to tittle design and also how it might relate to accents and punctuation we might see in some of the later slides. But to see, we still have that very fast gesture in Pique and local script. It has kind of that handmade, sort of look, but it definitely looks, there's not as much motion and happening in the tittle. But do you have any observations?
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, main note is kind of the emphasis of kind of the sharpness to round relationships in Pique to help emphasize this point. What's really interesting in the tittle of Pique is like a much more this kind of cupping effect. It's not what I would expect. Like the solution would be a more radical curve on that side compared to the other aspects of the dot for the J. So I thought that was really interesting about it. And yeah, I think I'm very surprised to see this kind of cut out a solution. I actually would have expected it just yeah, either like kind of connect over like that. Yeah, it's a very, you said it was in other letters too, so I guess that's how it all tied together. Just it added as a vocabulary voice. It's interesting. So I don't feel like it would add too much weight not to have that there. So it's curious. It's a curious choice. But I think it works. I think it works to help maintain the system. But these kind of decenter letters are quite tricky to make them work within that connected script system. Especially on both sides. I also noticed the negative side bearing on the right side. Right. Now, on local script, yeah, for me, I'm kind of curious, like, what's up with this? Like, I saw no other evidence for that kind of tittle treatment in it. If anything, I was expecting, I guess if I would expect anything, it'd be just maintain the diamond shape, this kind of like rounded diamond aesthetic. And even then, actually, then that's a curious question. Like, I always feel like designing typefaces, like the tittle design is like one of those things, right? There's a difference between a circle, a triangle, a square, or a triangle, or a diamond. These all add different flavors to your design, right? Basically, like the same J with a different tittle gives a different flavor, right? And as we said before, these are kind of precursors of other accent characters or punctuation that may borrow from the system, contrasted or complemented. So I always find that interesting to observe that. Yeah.
Definitely.
Ready to move on?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Now we start seeing the pairings.
Nice.
So it looks like it appears my instinct about notice the difference of the X heights, right, relative to the A center spaces and the cap heights. Yeah, Yeah, actually, the caps are really playing up that brush lettering aesthetic. I see that in Pique very much so, with this much shorter stroke this one versus much taller one this one, and this crossbar really playing up that cursiveness, that sign painter aesthetic.
Yeah, I love it. I love that that choice was made to let the caps really shine and peak. I mean, I think there's also small caps that were designed that are a little more toned down that could be used, you know, more regularly next to one another, because it'd be hard to set type where you have very expressive capitals all next to one another. But this, you know, in just regular title case like this would make a lot of sense. It's very cool. I love that a lot of liberty was taken in the design of the cap. And also kind of neat to note is that I feel like the cap, this H, like I think it feels like these strokes feel like slightly thinner or something than the lowercase. Like the lowercase feels like almost bigger and meatier than the cap, which I think is also nice because it really makes you pay a lot more attention to the lowercase letters and kind of like read them, so that the cap's flourishes aren't overpowering. And local script, we can see here that there's still like, I feel like so, well, this is interesting. I see this sometimes in more informal typefaces. So remember we were talking about the tapering of the stroke. It got thinner at the bottom here. Kind of the same thing was happening here, but in the other...
He rotated it.
Yeah, I rotated it over here. And then we've got like a crossbar with it's tapered and curved and stuff. And that's actually kind of high, you know, looks maybe high up. I don't know. It's kind of like, if I look at these two together, I don't feel like, you know, the same kind of... I don't know. It doesn't really feel like the same kind of feeling, both of these characters. I'm not sure. I might have to see some other of the caps of local script but I have a feeling that's what I've been noticing in local script. Each character kind of has its own, feels like it plays by its own rules almost. So I feel like it's not as much of a tight system as Pique. That's what I would say. Also to note, one other thing, like just checking out the spacing between these two letters. I was going to just comment
about that.
Yeah. I think we're going to find local script looks a lot more loosely spaced than Pique for sure.
Yeah, and that was, I mean, you can even confirm that. Well, definitely in the caps, like notice the cap spacing, right? Much larger.
Yeah, the internal space for sure.
Yeah, and again, you can confirm with that, kind of comparing how tight the space is in Pique versus local scripts. What's interesting is that the counter, it's definitely smaller in Pique. You know, local scripts is larger. So basically, as the counters got increased, you know, you would expect this to be increased as well. Their side-bearing relationships. But yeah, I think that's going to definitely affect the overall texture of the type as we move forward. Yeah, and one of the first things I definitely noticed was this rotation business, right? It took this guy, rotated 180, right? Yeah. And then there you go. Like this matches this, and this matches this. So again, it's an attempt to like kind of like, it's some parts informal cursive and other parts like very like type designy. Like it's very like it has a certain like rationalized system built into it, which by the way, all typefaces do because they're made by human beings, right, that are going to do that. But some designers are a little more opaque or not as clear. They don't show their hand as much. You know, we can see that a similar setup, like how this winds and thins down here. But notice that it's not exactly the same speed of tapering on the second stroke.
Right.
So there's like complications or nuances done.
And even it's now that you did that, I also want to note that it's kind of cool. The H, the uppercase H, has a little bit more of a curve going toward the left, and then we were saying, the curve is kind of going more toward the right in the lowercase. It's kind of cool to see the opposing curves, and there's like a little bit of tension there, which is cool. I really like it. Well, I guess you could say the same thing about this. We've got that concave, convex sort of curve, slight curve happening in local script as well.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the ways we can say it's. Like one of the ways I think we could say something is informal or kind of speaks to an informal hand is if it has that kind of phenomenon. I think it's safe to say that because that's something I see across both, right? How their counter spaces are drawn across letters. It has that kind of convexing. Yeah, it's going outward as opposed to inward. Right. Anyways, moving on. How are the
Cool. So
numbers?
yeah, I thought, sometimes in our presentations we want to look at some other characters other than just the letters. I thought let's check out the numbers because I thought they were kind of interesting. Especially local script has very unusual, like kind of unconventional design, I thought, of the letters or
It makes me think of like Walt
numbers.
Disney World. I don't know why it makes me think of
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
is that a fair analysis? Because I definitely feel like it's a
Especially
different
that,
flavor.
like the two for sure. There's something like very
Cartoony.
unusual, but yeah, like cartoony and stuff about it. Yeah, totally. I totally thought so.
I mean, the 2, the 3, the 4.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, these three. This is Walt Disney signature in a nutshell. Yeah, that's so interesting, man.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
uh, and also kind of, stuff that I don't usually see is, we like the way that it kind of knots over itself here in the one and the two. I mean, the two and the seven, I thought that was kind of unusual. Don't see that every day. And that the four, the four is like, feels like it's, whoops, the four feels like it's playing kind of a different game or something. I would have expected like a curve out or something. I don't know. I thought that was kind of unusual. They're
yeah.
all
And there's certain,
unusual.
and the other ones are like they're kind of typeface like Romans, but they're kind of not. Meaning, like, let's look at the 5 for example. Notice like it totally thins out to this in an odd way in this upper quadrant. The 8, it's imbalanced maybe at the top part versus the bottom, but it feels too much like a Roman typeface. Like I would, maybe I'd buy into it if it was a little more cursive and in treatment about that, right? And the same issue about like, so this typeface feels like it's trying to be vertical, the 9, but it also has that like weird but oblique energy in the curve
Yeah.
treatment.
Yeah, the six is, yeah, I was looking at the nine and six together. Like, yeah, the nine seems kind of like skewed or something to me. And the six, like, just seems kind of unnatural with, this seems fine going down here, but this, like, feels kind of, I don't know, lumpy and a little, I don't know. It didn't look as, I think these numbers don't quite look as considered in local script or something. But also, this is interesting too. I was talking about the O in, both of the typefaces when we looked at that. Like we have kind of this very unusual choice to have this very visible kind of, very, very unusual. Like I don't know who would start drawing an O at that position of the form, but that kind of unusual motion, but it also doesn't occur anywhere else in the other letters. So I just thought that was kind of strange too. But
Mm.
anyway, but this, that's another thing, looking at these little details. So in Pique, like here's, see on that 7, there's an area where that little disconnect appeared that they decided to include that. This is kind of cool that the 8, the very large, heavy top, a lot of weight and a lot of motion and speed happening there, and then the very thin kind of like attachment area or disconnected area. I thought that was kind of cool. And here we have, instead of the same approach as the 7, we just have like a little bit of an overlap kind of implied. So that's, kind of interesting, tiny little details. The Pique numerals to me seem more kind of cohesively designed, I would say, than the local script ones overall.
Also take notice, that this is an old style figure system. Probably looks like.
It's weird. It's kind of half, like I can't
Yeah,
quite
it's kind of half
tell.
and half. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, these are clearly lining figures.
Right, right. But yeah, you're right. This is like, we have kind of sort of ascenders going up here on the 6 and the 8, but it's
Which is that all styles do that, so that's not
right, right.
necessarily an issue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's just kind of, yeah, I guess I wasn't even I noticed it, but it wasn't like hit me over the head with it. Maybe also just because I'm thinking, remember you were noticing that the local script had kind of a taller ascender in the letters. So maybe I was thinking that these would be shorter or something if
That's
they were,
very true.
but
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of a halfway in between.
Yes. Cool.
Unusual. So what's next? Let's see. Ah,
Type set out.
yay. So this is helpful to kind of see like we were saying, you know what? I think local script is going to look a little bit more loose, and it certainly does to me. Um, it does look a lot looser than Pique. Pique does, like we were showing those overlaps of each character's side bearing. So again, this typeface wasn't designed to have a lot of alternate characters linking them together. It's just naturally there's like, this is where that A would overlap right there. It's just kind of a cool system where it became an overlapping script, but it doesn't like hit you over the head with it. That's very cool. Oh, and check out the O's.
Mm-hmm.
Time to look at the O's in context and how that looks.
Yes. So I think the big part is like, this does not connect with any. It just hangs out there as a cowlick, kind of just like floating on the side. One note to see is just again, here's something really appreciative. Look at how the TS is handled.
Yeah, that's cool. Huh. Wow, that's unusual how that's neat how that lines up, because I'm sure like, oh gosh, it must have been just very difficult to test every one of these letter combinations to make sure that these little overhang bits wouldn't clash. So here, and then we'll compare it to this. We've got this T was designed in such a way that, to avoid that clash. I think in most cases, at least in this word, we don't have any overlaps here in local script, but we have, like you said, the cowlick. We've got, well, what do we have? Wow, look at that. We got a V that goes above the baseline. We've got some like really flourishy things. We've got this, very distinctive R with kind of an I
curving on itself.
Curve. Yeah. Yep. This is neat. So here's, if we're talking about the J, how the J was handled, with the kind of incising. It's not in this word, but here at least we have kind of a comparison descender letter with the G, how that was handled. So that's kind of interesting to see, because it doesn't. This is one case where it doesn't quite follow. Like this doesn't look like a natural pen stroke thing to me, a brush stroke. Does it? I don't know. I guess I haven't.
It doesn't.
So I guess, liberties were taken in that case, because otherwise I don't know what you would do.
Yeah. Just in general, just again, overall, there's a certain like speed and tempo, right, and quickness that Pique is having that, Lokal is not having, because that's much more like, because of the spacing and its momentum is all kind of internally focused, right? The letters are kind of self-contained as opposed to being designed to move you forward into the next letter and forward of it.
So here's a question, like talking about the speed. So if you were to use these, in what scenarios would you use these typefaces? Like to me, actually, even though I personally, my taste is I love Pique's speed and thickness and, density, I would find local script in this word, at least, like I find it easier to read, I would say, just like it would be clearer to read, I think. Like, would you agree? Or I don't know.
I would. I mean, because of spacing. Here, let's switch to, I think we have some text settings, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I think this really kind of makes the case. Yeah. So the answer is yes, it would be easier to read, but I would say I think there are some color issues, like the ER. Notice that there's certain ligature treatments happening.
Yeah, I think the ligatures, like, I think they're a negative. I think they negatively impact, like this really catches my eye, this ZZ combo. Like to me, it kind of negatively affects, all of those ligatures to me look very unnatural. Well, except for the TT, that kind of looks good.
That's okay, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of, I think it negatively affects the, legibility of the typeface. Really draws the rhythm.
Yeah, because they group, you know what it is? Because it's like these typefaces are meant to be kind of spaced apart from each other, yet these ligatures are actually closer together.
Yeah, you're right. They have closer spacing than like you would see normally. Oh, that's cute. Now we get to see the O together. Look at that.
That's actually not too bad. That's working not too bad.
Yeah. But
ST, not so much.
Yeah, it's very, very unusual. But, it's like this sort of typeface, I can see someone using this on like, food packaging, and like it feels like one of those type of typefaces to me. Like that might be where you would see it. Some kind of like packaging of some product where you're like, it's trying to look kind of friendly and quirky and that sort of thing. Pique, to me, like it has a very different feel. Like this feels local script feels very like, friendly, bouncy, informal.
Like organic farm, like almost like organic farm milk packaging would have it. Yeah.
Pique to me looks like motorcycles or something. Like I'm thinking, like I don't know what I'm thinking, but it's a little more. Gosh, wow! Look at that rhythm. Look at the rhythm of this typeface. It's so interesting to me. Gosh, it feels like textural. Like I feel like maybe it reminds me of like tire tracks or something like that. Or
Yeah.
I don't know why, but gosh, ooh, I love it. Tasty. Um, but oh, and there's the J.
Yep.
The slight little cut you can still see at this scale. That's unusual. It's very interesting to see. Wonder what, like if we were to show these to graphic designers, like what do you think Pique, like if we wanted to describe this to someone who's like, give me a feeling for what you think Pique feels like. I just want to see what you would say.
French motorcycle race.
Okay. Motorcycles. I think we
Motorcycle
both agree.
chase. I think French
Okay.
motorcycle chase. Yeah.
Chase. Okay. Yeah. Very cool. Oh, and one other thing. Let's look again. We got Boozy over here and Boozy here. Here's those. We were talking about those little O cuts and how, you know, would those be noticeable or not? I think with Pique being a lot more kind of tightly spaced and really relies on these little, you know, a lot of this cutting and motion back and forth to try to like differentiate each letter and let you really see what it is. I'm imagining, I mean, if these were filled up, if these O's were completely solid, I mean, I can see how that might look a little bit too dark and draw your eye
Maybe
toward
too
it.
dark. Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be my. What's interesting is actually look at the counters. Look at the B counter and look at the OO counter, right? And Boozy. They're actually rough. They look pretty closely together. So that's the trick. Is like boldness is really actually when you make things really bold, your counters become more important, right? It's these negative spaces that actually matter ultimately, right? Basically, if we look at the counters of OO and then kind of look at that counter of the B, they look actually very similar. So that's why I think it works to not fill in that counter space because the counter is compensating for it. It's making it hold together.
Right, and it follows that same grammar of that same, you know, all the letters that have this same kind of angle. Like you really, you know, the P, you want to keep that same kind of rhythm happening at the bottom. There's like a few different, you know, things that were used. We've got the slightly softer one on all those end strokes and the C and the E and stuff, but we also have that a little bit sharper. Oh, I love it. Anyway, I'm glad that decision was made. This is so interesting too to see like, to see these difficult characters like the Z, like how they, you know, obviously we've got some weird stuff. Oh, look at the Z over here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Looks like the 2.
I was just going to comment on it. The numerals got their inspiration from the Z.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
Excellent. Well, we have some more.
Yeah,
Excellent.
we have one more sample. Yeah, I was thinking, you know what? Usually you wouldn't see these typefaces in that sort of setting where it's, you know, like at the paragraph level, you'd see it like this, where it's just, you know, a few words, a headline, that sort of thing. So I thought, let's take a look at that. Oh, we got the word jazz again, of course.
Yeah, we got jazz.
Sorry about that. But
good. Actually, again, it kind of plays up your point about disease.
Yeah. This is cool also to see the cap letters. You know, look at it, this is an instance where you can kind of see local script. Like we've got a ligature here for the TH. There's like 2 different L's happening. So the designers of this typeface, you know, really tried to make a lot of different sort of, you know, special. Oh, the VI is a ligature. Look at that.
Yeah. Huh. See, that's kind of fun. Like, sort of. Yeah. I think overall there was a lot of hoopla on the fundamentals that weren't resolved fully yet.
Yeah, I feel like it's like could have used more time, I think, to make things a little more consistency or you know, maybe a thoughtful system between things. Like, you know, sorry, I know we're beating this to death, but you know, like these instances like the A barely connects here, and then I'm wondering like why, and I guess the P here, you know, we have a few of those instances, cuts and stuff like happening, but if it doesn't, I don't know, like the ampersand feels like a little too thin here, like feels like it was shrunk down to me or something. I don't know. There's some issues I think about things that I don't quite I feel it could work a little better in the local script. Although it's interesting, you know, if we had more time, local script, it's part of like a large family where there are a lot of different weights and a few different kind of widths, I believe. So maybe there are some weights where it feels a little more resolved, but I think the weight in this is
Yeah, within this one. I mean, I think kind of the
right.
big contrast between Pique and this is Pique has a certain cohesiveness all the way through
Yes.
and
Yeah.
everything it's doing, right? That makes it
Ah,
work.
yeah, like
Yeah,
look
see,
at the notches. This is cool. Oh, I love it. Oh,
hmm
anyway.
right. That it's not as strong, yeah, it's just not as resolved in local script as such. Uh,
Yeah, I would agree.
yeah,
Though
I think we both
still
can
good
agree
for
on that.
your granola packaging, as we've discussed. So it's
Yeah,
still
all type has usage, right? It all comes down to because their flavors are so very radically different, even though
yeah.
they're kind of categorically very similar,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
You
they'd be
see,
in the same
and then
category for sure. It's funny.
yeah,
Yeah. Cool.
very telling. Awesome. And we're back one more time.
One more time. Yeah. I
Yes,
won't go on, but yeah, it was kind of interesting because the first time I saw these two typefaces, I thought like, oh, they're very similar kind of like in weight, I guess I would say. They're kind of have the same darkness, but actually the spacing results in a very different it's a very different
color.
feeling, very different color overall. So, and very
Yes.
different personalities. So, that was fun to look at these kind of informal things for a change. This is fun.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been Fontribute. I hope you're enjoying this episode, and I look forward to having Erin back on again next week. Erin, it's been a pleasure having you with us.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Awesome. Everyone have a great week. Share your thoughts in the comments below and talk to you all soon. Take care. Bye.